Last week we kicked off a little mini-series on GetPsyched all about men's mental health, an area that I'm researching currently and I'm very passionate about. Well, this week we're continuing on with that mini-series on GetPsyched about men's mental health with our second instalment, and this week we're going to be taking a look at the mental health of boys. What's up guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, and like I said, this week we're going to be taking a look at our second instalment of our mini-series on men's mental health, and we're going to be taking a look at the mental health of boys. So the first question to ask here is, what is the issue with mental health and boys? Well, the first thing to say is that it's a real growing area of concern. More and more in today's society, young boys are experiencing challenges with their mental health and actually challenges in experiencing therapy and actually accessing therapeutic treatment. A recent survey conducted amongst boys aged 10 to 13 found that 49% of them would not approach an adult or would not feel comfortable approaching an adult if they felt that they were having challenges with their mental health. 37% of that 49% said that they would put on a brave face, and 33% said that they would actually rather keep it to themselves. And the statistics show that young boys below the age of 16 are actually one of the most at-risk groups when it comes to suicide and mental health difficulties. As I said last week, one of the most shocking statistics in the United Kingdom right now is that the most likely cause of death of men under the age of 45 is that they'll actually take their own life. Now don't get me wrong, 45 shouldn't be considered in the young category, but under the age of 45 includes boys and teenagers and adolescents under the age of 16. So it's a real issue for them as well. So, a little bit of an understanding there about young boys, about boys and mental health. What is actually causing the development of mental health in boys right now though? Many of the mental health difficulties that are actually experienced in later life stem from issues with men in their childhood. So we can actually directly attribute childhood to creating some issues amongst men with mental health. What's more concerning is that we can actually start to see behavioural patterns and thinking patterns adopted in early childhood that carry men into later life. So what I'm trying to get at here is that a lot of the mental health difficulties experienced by men are learned and are experienced at a very young age in childhood, and that therefore develops into later life. So many of the mental health complications that happen for men actually are stemmed in these early years. Research has established that boys who are suffering from mental health difficulties often leave it very late before actually coming to seek therapy. They wait until it's crisis time a lot of the times before they actually start seeking therapy for mental health issues. Now, this could be, of course, about some of the principles or due to some of the principles that we looked at last week. Things such as male identity and masculinity. And one of the key points to carry on from this concept of male identity that's associated for young boys in particular is that a lot of their male identity is constructed not in necessarily what men are or who boys or who men should be, but their identity is actually constructed in not being feminine. So if they see a girl do that, then that's for girls, it's not for boys. Now, of course, this is stereotypically speaking. But again, this sense of male identity that I talked about last week that's so important to understand is one of the key issues for developing mental health issues amongst boys, for example. There's also something to be said about being strong and being autonomous in early years for boys that is taught at that very early stage. That concept of hegemonic, that toxic masculinity that we spoke about last week still applies. It applies at a very young age. It's socially constructed and we imply it upon boys from a very young age. I also think there's something to be said about the fact that we don't actually address men's mental health in general, how that can have a real negative implication for young boys, for boys of a young age, because you think of it, if a father has got mental health complications or a father is employing kind of toxic masculine principles in a young boy, think about what that's going to do for that child growing up. So the fact that we don't actually address men's mental health in general can have a real negative implication for the next generation of men. Now, these kind of things are actually evidenced in the everyday language that we use amongst young boys. Things like big boys don't cry, or that's for girls. These kind of evidenced uses of language give us a bit of a clue as to what we actually expect boys to be like. What happens when these boys experience mental health difficulties? Where do they go? They go to their identity. They go to that socially constructed identity that they've been given. And what does that tell them? What does that tell them about when they are struggling, when they feel weak, when things aren't going well, which inevitably will happen? What actually happens? What do they rely on? They rely on that male identity that's being given to them. This is even evident in the kind of toys and the games that we actually play with boys. Things that are focused on power, aggression and violence. Things on competitiveness and strength. Now don't get me wrong, some of those points, some of those things I have, some of them, they're not all bad, but when they're implied upon when we start feeling mental health difficulties or when we start to feel weak, then that's when the issues arise, I think. So what kind of other issues are there? Well, more and more we're seeing the impacts of social media, and you don't need me to tell you that, about how that can have an impact on mental health. Academics who have actually worked in men's mental health for a while are starting to see and report that the issues that boys are presenting with regarding mental health are changing as the years progress. They're starting to see more issues amongst body image and eating patterns even amongst boys, things that were actually very much feminine based at that time, but they're starting to see this amongst young boys, and it's a direct correlation to what is actually seen on Instagram and social media, for example. These academics state that, it used to be depression and anxiety that was really all you saw in boys of a young age when they started coming to therapy for mental health difficulties. That's really starting to change now. And as a result, we need to start thinking more about what's actually causing these issues for boys of a young age. You just go on Instagram and you type in anything really, and you're going to see fitness models, you're going to see people that are airbrush photos, that kind of men as well. That kind of thing has a real impact on young boys. That kind of perception of what they think men should look like, of what they think they should be, and they see that they're not looking like that. That's going to have negative implications for boys of a young age. So what can be done about this? Well, we need to make it clear that there actually is support for boys of a young age and adolescents as well available to them, and that it's okay to actually access that help. And I think our use of language here is key. We need to use positive and clear language to illustrate exactly what the service or what these services are all about. There's still so much stigma attributed to actually accessing therapy that we spoke about last week that's applicable to young boys as well. We need to also try and advocate for having mental well-being on a par with physical well-being. Now that comes from schools and that comes from the home as well. We also cannot silo mental health care. We can't put it just in one area. We need to put an awareness of mental health care in the areas where boys are, like at sports clubs, at school. We need to be talking about it at home as well. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. This week we've had our second installment of our little mini-series about men's mental health, when we've been looking at the mental health of boys. Hopefully you guys are getting use from this little mini-series that we're doing on GetPsyched. We've got a couple more videos to come all about men's mental health. If you've been enjoying the videos, then make sure to like, you can comment on them as well, and you can share them too. And if you've been enjoying GetPsyched in general, then make sure to hit that subscribe button, and you can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button, and you'll get weekly reminders every time I upload. Thanks so much for watching guys, and hopefully catch you next week.